Hello and welcome to Factual Insider, the channel that strives to cover as many facts as possible. Today we will be discussing 10 facts about Street Fighter you may not know. If you find any of the facts to be interesting, please be sure to hit the like button, subscribe and hit the bell icon to receive notifications. With that being said, let's get started. Number 1. As many Western players of Street Fighter will immediately know who M. Bison is, as he is one of Street Fighter's primary antagonists, Vega the Spanish masked man with a ridiculously long claw, and Balrog the Mike Tyson-inspired boxer. It may be unknown that the characters that Western Street Fighter players are so familiar with are actually named differently all the way over in Japan, as M. Bison as Vega, Vega as Balrog, and Balrog as M. Bison. The name changes took place to avoid a possible lawsuit against Mike Tyson's legal representatives. Number 2. For Street Fighter fans that have played Third Strike, you may remember that if you have a fight that involves Alex versus Hugo, there will be a stare down between the two fighters until eventually Hugo pushes Alex back with his chest. This display may look similar to hardcore wrestling fans that may remember WrestleMania 3 all the way back in 1987 when Hulk Hogan fought Andre the Giant. For those that may be a fan of both WWE and Street Fighter, you may enjoy Capcom's reference. Number 3. While it's no secret that Street Fighter was a massive success in the arcades, there was a time period in Japan during the 90s that Street Fighter got overtook in popularity in the arcades by another franchise that was not a fighting game but instead a puzzle game known as Puyo Puyo. Despite the fact it was a puzzle game, it still was a very competitive franchise that required players to stack chains with blobs known as Puyos to send junk to the competing player. Due to the success of Puyo Puyo, Capcom decided to have their own take on a competitive puzzle game known as Puzzle Fighter. Using characters from Street Fighter, it was meant to compete against Puyo Puyo and used elements that weren't in Puyo Puyo to help be its own standalone title. Please be sure to check out our other video 10 facts about Puyo Puyo you may not know. Number 4. Several Street Fighter characters were not originally characters from Street Fighter but were introduced in another game franchise known as Final Fight. This beat-em-up by Capcom focused more in clearing one area of enemies by fighting them and then progressing to the next area. Rolento, Hugo, Poison, Cody, Guy, Mike Hag-R, among others all had their beginnings in Final Fight, and Capcom would introduce these fighters into Street Fighter 3 and Street Fighter Alpha. Number 5. Street Fighter has a roster of characters and stages that take place all over the world, and so does its inspiration. Many Street Fighter characters have been inspired off of many real-life fighters with an extensive selection, such as Ryu inspired by Man Ovama, Ken inspired by Joe Louis, Balrog inspired by Mike Tyson, Hugo inspired by Andre the Giant, Zangief inspired by Victor Zangief, Crimson Viper inspired by Angelina Jolie, Sagat inspired by Sagat Petchyindi, Fei Long inspired by Bruce Lee, Laura Matsuda inspired by Kira Gracie, Poison inspired by Jean Bisson, Abel inspired by Fedor Emelianenko, and finally Karen Kanzuki is inspired by Alison Arngrim. Number 6. Being a very successful gaming franchise and being well respected among gamers, Street Fighter has seen massive success since its beginnings in 1987 and has been placed into numerous different world records from the Guinness Book of World Records. Being one of the highest-grossing video game franchises of all time, the fighting franchise has received Best-Selling Coin-Operated Fighting Game, Most Prolific Fighting Game Series, Longest-Running Fighting Video Game Series, Best-Selling iOS Fighting Game, among other world records. Number 7. While fighting fans may be familiar with Fatal Fury and King of Fighters, many fans of the fighting genre may not realize that Fatal Fury was made because of Street Fighter and not just because of Street Fighter's impact on gaming. The original creator of Street Fighter, who is Takashi Nishiyama, left Capcom after working on the first Street Fighter title, which released in 1987, and became a part of the SNK team and helped create Fatal Fury. Nishiyama would state that if he made the sequel to Street Fighter, Fatal Fury would be that sequel. Number 8. In 2010, attendees at the San Diego Comic-Con and especially fans of Street Fighter and Tekken would be pleased to hear that Capcom and Namco would announce 2 crossover games featuring Street Fighter and Tekken. Originally, both game companies would use the rosters from their respective franchises and implement their style of gameplay with their games. Capcom, realizing that crossover projects with their characters have a had track record with success, would release Street Fighter X Tekken in 2012, but Namco on the other hand would release their own crossover project, and it wouldn't be until 2016, after 4 years of Street Fighter X Tekken's release, that Namco would announce that they would not continue to develop Tekken X Street Fighter, which would be Namco's take of the combining fighting game franchises. Number 9. 2 years after the release of the original Street Fighter, Capcom would release Final Fight in 1989, which would be the beat-em-up that would introduce the likes of Mike Hag-R, Cody and the others mentioned previously in this video. Final Fight was originally meant to be a sequel to the original Street Fighter title, however feedback was received that it played too differently than Street Fighter in order for the game to continue on the Street Fighter legacy, despite being promoted in Japan as Street Fighter 89 and then as Street Fighter The Final Fight. Number 10. Many Street Fighter fans will be familiar with the 6-button layout that was introduced in Street Fighter II, however this was not always the case with the fighting franchise. Back in 1987, when the original Street Fighter was released, some of the arcade cabinets would only have 2 buttons instead of 6. These 2 buttons were pressure sensitive in the arcades, meaning the harder players pressed, the stronger the attacks, just like pressing less on the buttons, the weaker the attack. Due to the buttons being prone to breaking, this idea of Among Street Fighter was abandoned and was replaced with the button layout that Street Fighter fans are more familiar with. Well, there you have it. Those were 10 facts about Street Fighter you may not know. Hope that the video was enjoyable and entertaining. You are encouraged to watch more facts about gaming and other miscellaneous topics. See you next time.